U.S. Supreme Court today once again becomes the focal point of America's abortion debate, both outside the courthouse on Capitol Hill with throngs of demonstrators expected, but most important inside its chambers where justices will hear over an hour of arguments in a case that many have called the most significant abortion case in 50 years. Good morning. It's the first day of the last month of 2021, December 1st. This is Washington Journal. In this first hour, we will hear from proponents on both sides of the argument and hear from you. As we mentioned, demonstrators gathering on Capitol Hill outside the U.S. Supreme Court. Here's how you can join the discussion. The line to use for Republicans is 202-748-8001. For Democrats, it's 202-748-8000. Independents and others, 202-748-8002. We welcome your thoughts on text as well, 202-748-8003, and tell us your name and where you're texting from. We'll keep an eye on the Facebook page, and we'll look for your posts on Instagram and Twitter at C-SPAN WJ. And we'll be keeping an eye as well on the crowd outside the Supreme Court. We'll certainly hear news conferences later on. And just to remind you or let you know about our coverage plans of the oral argument today, set to start at 10 a.m. Eastern this morning, we will cover that live over on C-SPAN 3. You can also follow it on our new mobile app, C-SPAN Now. The New York Times this morning with photos of the inside of that medical clinic in Jackson, Mississippi. That's at the heart of the debate, the Jackson Women's Health Clinic organization of Jackson, Mississippi, and some photos from inside that clinic, which continues to operate. Its fate to be determined partly, certainly, by the case coming before the Supreme Court today. We are joined this morning by our first guest of the hour, Marjorie Dannenfelser, who is the president of the Susan B. Anthony List and has been with that organization since 1993. Marjorie Dannenfelser, welcome to Washington Journal.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
Tell us about this case. This is Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization. A bit of the background on this and why it wound up at the Supreme Court.
Sure. This case was agreed to, as any case is, by the Supreme Court. 4 justices had to agree to take this case up. And they agreed to answer only one question, and that is any limit on abortion pre-viability constitutional? So is any pre-viability abortion limit constitutional? And that is exactly the question that the pro-life movement has been trying to get the Supreme Court to take up for quite some time, and therefore has passed all sorts of gestational limits all over the country. 100 bills, in fact, have been signed into law this year alone. Not all gestational limits, but many are. And so the question is, if the court answers yes in June or July when this case comes down, that there are some pre-viability limits on abortion that they see as constitutional, then that really strikes at the heart of Roe versus Wade, which is the viability test. If the answer is yes, that is a revolution for Roe. It could overturn it. They could come up with a different test. Our hope is that Roe is overturned and that the debate moves back to the states where we believe it belongs, where the democratic process can bring consensus in each state and have that shown in the law. But that's what in oral arguments today, just a few steps from where we are right here, that's what they'll be arguing back and forth.
Is it important to you, your organization, that the Supreme Court explicitly say in its ruling, and as you mentioned, eventually we'll hear that ruling at the end of the term, likely on this case, that they explicitly say that Roe v. Wade was ruled incorrectly and thereby is overturned? That
is absolutely our goal. It's what our amicus brief, which is 45 states with 79 women legislators representing those states. That's the case that they make, that it should be overturned, that it was wrongly decided, that it took away the democratic process and the ability of women whose views are not monolithic on this issue to also argue their views, our views, state by state, and have that reflected in our laws. And also Attorney General Fitch, that's her argument. That's the Attorney General of Mississippi. Her argument is that should be overturned, that it's a completely unworkable ruling. That view is really reflected in some liberal jurists, progressive jurists from the past, including Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that it's a very unworkable and almost indefensible in terms of constitutional law, that there should be some some direction from the court, yes, but that it should at least be allowing states to again, in something so delicate and so difficult and such with such moral consequence for the nation, that it should be allowed into the public arena, and that debate should end up in a consensus in each state that is where there are leaders, that there are elected officials accountable to those laws, and who can be affirmed or voted out, depending on the results.
Some of the reporting of Amy Howe, who covers the court, as you know, for SCOTUS blog, the headline on her piece, "Roe v. Wade hangs in the balance as reshaped court prepares to hear biggest abortion case in decades." In her reporting, she said that the court went through some 13 conferences in considering whether to take on this case. So it's clear they know this case pretty well. What sort of arguments do you think that they will be drilling down on today in oral argument?
Well, they could and should be drilling down on the constitutional problems with Roe versus Wade, and the viability test, whether that is a test that is reliable enough to move into the future. Viability, of course, has changed with each decade about a week since Roe versus Wade. So it's gone from about 28 weeks to now hovering around 22 weeks. Is that a reliable constitutional standard for abortion law? Almost anyone involved in constitutional law says no, a shifting standard never is. Undue burden, which was the test in Pennsylvania versus Casey, which reaffirmed Roe, the undue burden standard also. What does that mean? There are layers upon layers of different tests, and they've completely reworked the trimester system since Roe versus Wade. It's a confusing mess, and it is also, I think, that is what they will be arguing there. I mean, I think that there are a lot of arguments that are taken to the court that are influential but not dispositive, and one is how out of sync we are in terms of laws around the world. 47 out of 50 European nations have laws that limit abortion before 15 weeks. 12 weeks is the limit in Germany, Norway, and Switzerland, and 14 weeks in France, Spain, and Belgium. Now, they don't have our Constitution. They have different ones, but they're leading moral indicators for the rest of the world. These are progressive, sometimes liberal nations that have a more humane law that we should at least be satisfying their standard. Instead, our standard is in alignment with North Korea and China, which is no limit up until the point of birth.
Who is arguing for the state, and what should we know about them?
For Mississippi?
Yes.
Attorney General Fitch is the lead, but her Solicitor General, Scott Stewart, will be arguing on behalf of the state of Mississippi. He has as you might expect, a originalist background. He's worked for conservative judges in the past. He's very grounded in constitutional law and the perfect person to be arguing this case.
We've got calls waiting for Marjorie Dannenfelser from the Susan B. Anthony list, the president of that organization. Let's go to Steve in San Jose, California. First up on our Republican line.
My perception is that you believe that this should be a states' rights issue, and and I do believe that as well. This should never have been decided by the Supreme Court as a one-size-fits-all. You have areas of the country that are the Bible Belt areas that do not believe in abortion, and in those states, I believe that if you want to have abortions, unlimited abortions, it should be decided by the people in the state. You bring up some very good points that most of the rest of the world, there are limits. And I'll close with saying that the Constitution provides for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but the progressives do not believe in life.
Yeah, I think you raised a good point about what different states will do. In your state, at least at this point, it's possible that your state will dig in and basically guarantee through the democratic process that abortions will be allowed for quite some time. Same for New York, Vermont, other places like that. There are purple states that will have perhaps like 15, 20-week limits. There will be different laws, and that actually is a great tradition. It's a great American tradition to handle deep moral issues. I want to be clear on one thing. My organization and I and the pro-life movement thinks that that there are two people in every unplanned pregnancy, the mother and the child, and so I'm not advocating for a 15, 20-week standard. I'm just saying that the better way to handle this issue in civil discourse is to allow people to argue it out again and get to consensus and have that consensus written into law. And then if they don't like it, then they vote that guy out or that woman out and start all over again. That's how this nation has come to a good place of civil discourse. And just one more thing, Roe versus Wade put a cap on that ability and guaranteed for almost 50 years complete unrest on this issue. No ability to allow that friction, that political friction, to make to work its way out and work its way into consensus and into the law.
Let's hear from Kelfani in Ellicott City, Maryland. Democrats line.
Thank you for taking my call. I couldn't disagree more with your guest and also the previous caller. In terms of states' rights, I'm always nervous as an African-American male living here in America because I know what that leads to. And I think those people who argue for states' rights, for example, and I'll get to my point about abortion, they don't mind blurring the lines between church and state. But let's just say that there's an Islamic political class that gains ascendancy of the state, then church and state will be an issue. But in terms of abortion, what does it matter? No one says that if you're pro-life, that you're forced to get an abortion. So what does it matter? I think this is rooted in the Victorian notions of women's bodies, like this idea that men should have control over women's bodies. So what does it matter if someone decides to terminate a pregnancy? Women can die giving birth. Women can die, carrying forth a pregnancy. They can die through a miscarriage. I think they should have the right to choose what they want to do with their body. And worst thing is, if you disagree, then don't date those women, or those women should deny sex to men who want to impose rules.
Well, let me answer your question, because I think it's a good question. And it really gets to the fundamentals. First, on your Victorian comment, as a woman who has benefited from the earliest feminists that really kicked the doors open for women in politics, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all those women saw abortion as a sign of something terrible going on in society. They saw the breaking of the bond between woman and child as a moment of exploitation of women. And it was, and it can be, and it still can be. The reason that they saw it like that is that they saw two people in every abortion. Instead of one. That's what I mean about getting down to the fundamentals. If you think that there are two people, once you're pregnant, there are two people, it's almost inarguable that there are, then that is a moment in which we must rise to the occasion and care for both. And that is fundamental and vital and at the center of the pro-life movement's convictions moving forward, that the law must reflect that humane reality and that our lives in service to women and children have to reflect that humane reality. So look, if I thought it was the equivalent of an appendectomy or even a hysterectomy, an abortion was the moral equivalent of that, then this would be the stupidest movement that you've ever seen. But if you think that there are two people involved in every pregnancy, then this is the greatest human rights movement in many, many years since the beginning of the country's founding.
People have been gathering at the Supreme Court overnight. A tweet here from Colorado Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, who says this: "My boys and I attended a prayer vigil last night at the Supreme Court. Our C-SPAN cameras are at the court and will be throughout the day." And again, coverage today of that oral argument on C-SPAN 3. We go to Jackson Heights, New York. Dan's on the Republican line. Good morning.
Good Good morning. I'm, when you study technical fields, now my field is brain development, I just wonder, what the hell do people mean when they say viability? Because a lot of what we consider viability, somebody alive, the kind of life they would have in our society today would be atrocious. And I think that it would be a real torture for someone to be forced to live in their condition in the kind of world we have today. So the question for me is, who do you really care about, some abstract principle or the individual that is produced from such a union? I think really the emphasis and the discussion should be on birth control, should be on how to prevent repeated appearances for abortion. And we should realize that an abortion is a way of ending a terribly suffering life in many cases, because in the early years of life, the misery that you'll have the rest of life is getting printed in.
All right, Dan, we'll hear from our guest.
There are a couple of questions packed in there. One is about viability and the worth of a life that is perhaps suffering. In some cases, that's right. It is not even close to a significant percentage of abortions, but yes, there are those cases. And a couple of things to consider about viability. One is, and the reason that standard came about was, okay, maybe it's a human being if it can be self-sufficient, if it's on the table and it can live without the umbilical cord. Well, obviously the baby can't live if this just sit there, and none of us are completely self-sufficient. Many of us feel non-viable often because we always need the help and support of humanity around us. But also look at the suffering child within the womb, whether it's viable or not, who, as you say, is going to have a suffering young life. There are the emphasis now in medicine is to try to treat and help unborn children, even in the womb, with surgeries that are so miraculous that they have changed and altered lives for the better, because those corrections have happened in surgery in the womb. That is the approach when we see a suffering child. How do you relieve the suffering of the child? Well, you can relieve something by killing the child, but you can, which also has effects that lead to all sorts of other suffering among the survivors of that death. But what we do is, when we see them both as people, which they are, and arguably two human beings, we do all we can to address the needs of both. I'm very much a part of the special needs community and have a daughter with special needs. And if you've lived in that world, you can see that it's a dangerous thing to comment upon the value of children who are imperfect. They make us better.
Jackson, Mississippi's Clarion Ledger has this headline this morning, quote, "Even if we win, we lose. Abortion access in Mississippi already limited without Roe challenge." Marjorie Dannenfelser, this is a case, the one before the Supreme Court today, has already been blocked by two courts, a federal court and the district court, the circuit court. What makes you think, the appeals court, I should say, what makes you think it'll have success before the Supreme Court this term?
I'm a little unclear about what that comment meant. Maybe they mean there's not enough abortion clinics in Mississippi. I don't know what that meant. But right now, under Roe versus Wade, the 15-week limit cannot stand. It can only stand if Roe is set aside. It doesn't pass the viability test that Casey has interpreted Roe as having. So the reason that I think there's a possibility now is because of the march through the years of all of the states passing the most ambitious laws that they could gestational limits, 15-week heartbeat, 20 weeks based on the pain of the child at 20 and 15 weeks. None of them have been allowed to go make their way into the law because of Roe. The frustration over almost half a century of this has led to some understanding among jurisprudential experts and constitutional lawyers that Roe was very badly decided. It created more civic problems than it helped set aside. That frustration has led to more Supreme Court justices who see the constitutional nature of this question, are really concerned about it getting it right, we hope. And so now that we have 3 additional Supreme Court justices that have a view that we believe is consonant with the Constitution, we think there's more hope that they would uphold a 15-week limit in one state in this country, and therefore setting aside perhaps for other states the ability to do the same.
Let's go to Tammy on the Republican line, Lenore, North Carolina. Hi there.
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'm just calling to say that I don't agree with abortion. I think abortion should be made illegally.
Tammy, you're getting a bit confused. Turn your television down. Mute your television. Go ahead with your comment.
Turn the TV down a little bit, honey. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
No, I think abortion should be made illegally.
All right, we got your point there, Tammy. Going to move on. We're going to go to Sparta, New Jersey. Next up, Richard on the Democrats line.
Hi, good morning. If you wake up in a country where abortion is legal, you're probably in a Western democracy. If you wake up in the morning and you're in a country where abortion is illegal, you're in a dictatorship, a third world dictatorship, or something of that. You can look that up, by the way. Now, the other thing is, I'm curious because the Bible says in Genesis that a person is a person when they take their first breath. Genesis 2:7. I don't understand why people just don't buy that. Since for thousands of years, that's been the case. People are not a people until they take their first breath. Now, I do have a question, actually, for you. You have said a couple of times that there's 2 people involved, okay? So it's a person. So, as you know, if a baby dies after a week, there's usually a funeral. I have never heard of anybody going to a funeral for a fetus. If it's a person, then you're going to have a funeral for it. Have you ever gone to a funeral for a fetus? Do you know anybody who ever has? And why don't you tell me the difference why you don't go to a funeral for a fetus?
Is that the question?
All right, Richard.
Well, yes, I actually have gone to more than one funeral from women who've had miscarriages that, especially when it was later in the gestation of the baby. I mean, it's almost undeniable to most people when they see a baby, a miscarriage at 6-7 months. It's grief. There's a grief. There is also grief over abortion. One thing I just want to point out, just in case there's any misunderstanding too, no one's going to wake up in America and find abortion illegal as a result of this case. The only result that would evolve from this case that we hope is that Roe is overturned and that the states have the ability to pass their own laws. And perhaps get some more humane books on the laws on the books. That would be the case. There is a misnomer, and has been for a long time, that somehow overturning Roe outlaws abortion. Absolutely not. It just opens the doors to democracy in every single state.
What's your group's view on allowing abortion in the cases of rape or incest?
Well, I obviously think that every single life deserves attention and focus and love, just like the mother. But I also know that there are a lot of differences of opinion in each state. We've supported candidates who have views that have those exceptions all the time. I think those are matters of they're small percentage cases that matter, yes, but they're certainly not the nexus of the debate, and it's an important debate for states to have.
Your group, the Susan B. Anthony list, is focused on getting candidates elected statewide and nationally that support more restrictions on abortion. How successful have you been over the years? As I mentioned, you've been with him since 1993, correct?
Quite a while, yes. We've been very successful over time. It's really the reason why, part of the reason why we have this case today, and in conjunction with a lot of other pro-life activity all across the country. But without electing senators, without electing presidents, without electing governors who can, first of all, presidents nominating Supreme Court justices confirmed by the Senate, and then now a Supreme Court that would hear this particular case requires all those people that I just mentioned getting elected to public office who believe in the sanctity of human life and who believe in returning and restoring this debate back to the states. We've been very successful over time, and in fact, last election, one of the little known things is that a record number of pro-life women, we helped elect to the U.S. Congress, 31 women who are pro-life were elected to the U.S. Congress. That's a rising tide and really points to this reality that abortion opinion among women is not monolithic. In fact, women in large majority percentages think that abortion should be limited after 12 weeks. So this is not your mother's 70s and 60s women's movement anymore. This is a time where women who are elected, who have divergent views, and we deserve to be heard.
Let's hear from Joy in Coventry, Rhode Island, Independent Line. Go ahead. Joy, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, I was just calling to think that don't people realize that this isn't really going to stop in a lot of states because there's still going to be backyard abortions no matter what's going to happen. It's not really going to stop no matter what happens. What do you think about that?
Well, I think to the extent that that's the case, we better get to those women and serve them and their children quickly. In other words, if you see an egregious human rights violation of any other stripe and any other time in history, and you said that is still going to continue, so we might as well not do anything about it. Well, that would obviously be unacceptable. What we do is we go in and we make sure that the human rights abuse stops and that the people who are suffering get served. Even if you don't see that as the case early on in pregnancy, which I do, it is easier to see it at least at 15 weeks, which is the moment that we're talking about right now, and what the Supreme Court will be ruling on in June after oral arguments today. Anybody who has seen the 15-week baby on a sonogram on the refrigerator can see that the baby often is sucking their thumb. They're figuring out which is they know about that point, whether they're left or right-handed. They respond to touch, they respond to taste, they respond to pain, physical pain. These are people that are small. And so that's why we speak in terms of human rights when we're talking about these children, while we're considering the needs of their mothers.
Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony list. Great to have you with us on Washington Journal this morning.
Thank you.
More ahead on this topic here on Washington Journal. We continue our conversation on today's Supreme Court abortion case. We will hear from the president of NARAL Pro-Choice America. Minnie Tamaraju will join us momentarily here on the program. We'll continue to take your calls as well at 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and 202-748-8002 for Independents. Looking live outside the Supreme Court chambers, where there are many demonstrators and protesters on both sides. The case is at 10 o'clock this morning. It'll be live on C-SPAN 3 and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Before we get to our next guest, comments from Judy Chu, Congresswoman from California, who introduced legislation this term to protect abortion rights in the country.
The Supreme Court has announced its intention to hear Jackson Women's Health Organization versus Dobbs, a case that directly challenges Roe versus Wade this December. The Mississippi ban threatens abortion providers with severe penalties for providing abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. It defies nearly 50 years of Supreme Court precedent going back to Roe that recognizes that the Constitution guarantees each person the right to decide whether to continue a pregnancy. There is no path for the Supreme Court to uphold Mississippi's ban without overturning Roe's core holding that every pregnant person has the right to decide whether to continue their pregnancy prior to viability. Abortion restrictions are part of the intertwined systems of oppression that deny Black, Indigenous, and people of color their constitutional rights. The people most hurt by these restrictions are those who already face barriers to health care.
And again, live outside, our cameras live outside the Supreme Court.